My name is Miles. For 15 years, I was the legal architect of this company. Not just a lawyer, but the guy who built the fortress. Every patent, every trademark, every piece of intellectual property that gave us our edge, that was my work. I wasn't just filling out forms, I was laying the foundation stones of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, one precisely worded claim at a time. I took pride in it, the kind of deep, quiet pride that comes from knowing you are the indispensable man, the one person who truly understands how the whole thing is wired together. It's a dangerous feeling. That pride, it can make you loyal. And loyalty, in the modern corporate world, is often just a liability waiting to be exploited. It certainly was for me. If you've ever poured your life into a job only to be shown the door because a spreadsheet said you were a rounding error, then you know exactly the kind of story this is. Stick around, because you're going to want to hear how it ends. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. Mondays are too optimistic, Fridays too celebratory. Tuesdays are for corporate executions. The summons came in a sterile email from HR with the subject line synergy and restructuring discussion. That one word, synergy, was the first sign of doom. It's a word used exclusively by people who have never created anything in their life, a verbal smokescreen for destruction. The meeting was in a soulless, glass-walled conference room on the executive floor, a place I'd only ever entered to deliver good news or to save a senior VP from some legal mess of their own making. This time the room felt different. Colder, across the polished mahogany table sat Hunter, the new CEO. He was everything I wasn't, young, maybe 40, with a predatory smile, a ridiculously expensive watch, and an MBA from a school that taught him everything about value and nothing about worth. He radiated an aura of disruptive energy, the kind that mistakes tearing things down for building them up. Next to him was a nervous-looking woman from HR, clutching a tablet like a shield. Her name was probably Brenda or Linda. It didn't matter. She was just there to witness the kill. Hunter didn't bother with pleasantries. He launched right into a PowerPoint-infused monologue about optimizing operational efficiencies and leveraging third-party expertise to streamline our legal overhead. It was a masterclass in corporate jargon, a string of empty phrases designed to make a brutal, short-sighted decision sound like a stroke of genius. I just sat there, my hands resting calmly on the table, and listened. I watched his eyes. They never quite met mine. They darted around, focusing on his talking points, on the HR drone, on the skyline outside the window. He was a man delivering a verdict he didn't have the courage to own. Finally, he got to the point. The company was outsourcing the entire legal department to a firm called Very Cheap Legal Solutions, or something equally confidence-inspiring. My position, he explained with the detached sympathy of a surgeon informing a family that the patient didn't make it, was being eliminated. Effective immediately. 15 years of service, of late nights, defending against patent trolls, of carefully crafting the legal DNA of the company, all erased in a 10-minute meeting by a man who probably couldn't even name our foundational patent. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. I could see the HR woman shifting in her seat. Hunter's smile tightened at the edges. They expect you to yell, to beg, to break down. It validates their power. I gave them nothing. I just nodded slowly. I understand, I said. My voice was even, almost gentle. It wasn't the reaction they were prepared for. My calm seemed to unnerve Hunter more than any outburst would have. He started stammering, talking about a severance package, about how this was purely a business decision, not personal. It's always a business decision. That's the great absolution for all corporate sins, as if businesses is some amoral deity to whom we must all make sacrifices. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, and I saw him for what he was, a child playing with a machine he didn't understand. A machine I had built, and that's when a thought, cold and clear as ice, formed in my mind. He didn't just fire a lawyer. He fired the only person who knew how the machine actually worked. He had no idea of the complexity under the hood. He just saw a line item on a budget, an expense to be cut. He thought competence was expensive. He was about to find out how costly incompetence could be. The HR woman slid a thick folder across the table, the severance agreement. The final insult. I didn't open it, I just stood up, smoothed the front of my jacket, and said, "Thank you for your time." I turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance. The walk back to my office was the longest of my life. I passed the desks of colleagues I'd worked with for over a decade. I saw my nameplate still on my door. Inside, my life was already being packed into a sad little cardboard box by a security guard who looked apologetic. My diplomas, a picture of my wife and me, the little scale model of a clipper ship I'd been painstakingly building during my lunch breaks for the last year. Symbols of a life, a career, reduced to clutter. As I was escorted out of the building, the security guard, a guy named Frank, who I'd always shared a morning nod with, leaned in and whispered, "This is wrong, Miles. What they're doing is just wrong." I clapped him on the shoulder. "It's just business, Frank," I said, tasting the bitterness of the words. He knew, and I knew, that was a lie. This wasn't business. This was a betrayal. And as the automatic glass doors slid shut behind me, I wasn't thinking about my severance or my pension or my next job. I was thinking about patent 7,432,158, our foundational patent, the one everything else was built on, the one that was up for a crucial renewal next month, the one with a tiny, subtle, and absolutely critical flaw that I had intentionally built into it years ago. A legal loophole, a hidden time bomb, and the only person in the world who knew how to disarm it was walking out the door carrying his life in a cardboard box. The deadline was in 1 week, the clock was ticking, the drive home was a blur, the city streets, the familiar turns, the autumn leaves skittering across the road, it all felt like a movie playing in front of me, disconnected from my reality. My mind was a maelstrom of shock, anger, and a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. 15 years. I started at this company when it was a scrappy startup with a brilliant idea and not much else. The founder, a man named Arthur Vance, was an engineer, a true visionary. He understood that a great idea was worthless if it wasn't protected. He hired me when I was just a few years out of law school, full of ambition. He didn't want a paper pusher, he wanted a strategist, a guardian. He used to call me his legal watchtower. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence amplifying the ringing in my ears. I looked at the house my salary had paid for, the garden my wife, Clara, so lovingly tended. This wasn't just a job, it was the bedrock of my life, the source of my professional identity, and it had been taken from me not with a bang, but with the quiet, indifferent click of a line being deleted from a spreadsheet. The coldness of it was what hurt the most. The sheer, impersonal, transactional nature of the dismissal. I was no longer Miles, the architect of their security. I was a cost center, an inefficiency. Finally, I got out of the car, the cardboard box of my former life feeling both heavy and ridiculously light. I walked inside. Clara was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepped ingredients for dinner. She took one look at my face and the box in my hands, and her smile vanished. The humming stopped. She didn't have to ask. She just came over, took the box from my hands, set it on the floor, and wrapped her arms around me. I think that was the moment it truly hit me. I buried my face in her shoulder, and the professional composure I'd maintained in that conference room finally shattered. The full weight of the betrayal, the waste of it all, came crashing down. I didn't sob, but a deep, ragged breath escaped me, the kind you take when you've been holding it for too long. She just held me. She didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. She knew me better than that. She knew this was a wound to my soul, to my sense of purpose. After a long moment, she led me to my study, the room where I'd spent so many late nights, working on the very patents that had just been outsourced to the lowest bidder. She poured me a glass of the good single malt I saved for special occasions. I guess this qualified as one, just not the kind I'd ever imagined. She just said, "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about Hunter's smarmy corporate speak, the HR woman's averted eyes, the casual cruelty of it all. As I spoke, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning anger. It wasn't just about me. It was about Arthur Vance, who had passed away 2 years ago, leaving his legacy in the hands of men like Hunter. It was about the engineers and scientists I'd worked with, brilliant people whose work I had protected with every ounce of my legal skill. Now that protection was being handed over to some cut-rate legal mill that probably used an AI to draft their filings, I looked over at my workbench, at the half-finished model of the USS Constitution. I'd spent months on it. The intricate rigging, the tiny, hand-painted cannons, the precisely carved planks of the hull. It was a testament to patience, to detail, to the idea that things of value are built slowly and carefully. Hunter and his kind were sledgehammer men. They saw a complex, beautiful ship and only thought of its scrap value. That's when my mind went back to the flaw, the kill switch, the secret I had buried deep in the legal code of patent 7,432,158. Clara listened intently as I explained it to her. It wasn't an accident. It was a fail-safe. I had built it in about 7 years ago. We had just fought off a hostile takeover attempt by a venture capital firm known for asset stripping. They'd come close, dangerously close to seizing control. It was a wake-up call. I realized that the company's greatest asset, its core IP, was also its greatest vulnerability. In the wrong hands, it could be sold off, licensed improperly, or simply allowed to wither. So, I created an insurance policy. I explained to Clara how patent law, especially for foundational patents, can be incredibly complex. A patent isn't a single, monolithic thing. It's a bundle of claims, each defining a specific piece of the invention. Some claims are broad, covering the core concept. Others are narrow, covering specific applications. The strength of the patent lies in its broadest claims. My flaw was buried in the language of Claim 1, the broadest of them all. On its own, the language was technically sound, but contained a subtle ambiguity, a specific term that was defined in a way that, if challenged by a knowledgeable opponent, could be interpreted to mean something much narrower than intended. It was a ticking time bomb. The disarm code was a very specific type of filing called a continuation in part, or CIP. It wasn't a standard renewal. A standard renewal is just paying a fee. A CIP actually adds new material to the original patent application. In this case, the CIP I had prepared years ago and kept in a private encrypted file didn't add new technology. It added a single crucial paragraph that referenced an obscure ruling from a 1980s Federal Circuit case. That paragraph clarified the ambiguous term in Claim 1, locking in its broad definition and rendering it ironclad. Without that specific CIP filed before the renewal deadline, the patent would renew, yes, but it would be a hollowed-out version of itself. The foundational claim would be vulnerable. Any competent challenger could drive a truck through it. The company would be left with a portfolio of minor specific patents, but the core of their kingdom, the very ground they stood on, would be gone. Why did I do it? It was a question I had asked myself many times over the years. Was it arrogance, a desire to make myself indispensable? Looking back now, sitting in my study with the ruins of my career around me, I knew the real reason. It was for Arthur. It was a dead man's switch, designed to protect his legacy from the very kind of corporate vandalism that Hunter represented. I never thought I'd have to use it. I thought it would remain my secret, a silent testament to my guardianship, until I retired and passed the knowledge on to a worthy successor. But Hunter had fired the guardian. He'd thrown the watchtower keeper off the wall, and now the fortress was undefended. The catalyst came the next day. I was trying to make sense of the severance paperwork, a generic, insulting document that offered a pittance in exchange for my silence, and a non-compete clause so broad it was probably unenforceable. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, my former paralegal. She was a sharp, dedicated young woman I'd hired and mentored myself. The text was frantic. "Miles, you won't believe this. The new firm, Vericheap, just sent over their IP transition plan. It's a joke. It's a generic checklist. They have the 158 patent renewal listed as a standard fee payment. They have no idea. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew it. I knew this would happen. Hunter, in his infinite wisdom, had hired a firm that treated patent law like filling out a DMV form. They saw a deadline and a fee, and they ticked the box. I texted back, "Don't say anything, Sarah. Just observe." A few minutes later, she called me, her voice a hushed whisper. She was hiding in a supply closet. "Miles, it's worse than I thought." I looked them up. Vericheap Legal Solutions. They're basically a high-volume document processing center. Their main business is boilerplate contracts and trademark registrations for small businesses. They've never handled major patent litigation. They are completely out of their depth. She paused, and I could hear the fear in her voice. Hunter is parading their lead counsel around the office today. A guy named Todd. He keeps talking about disrupting the legal spaces and using proprietary algorithms to manage IP. Miles, he looks like he's barely 30. He's all style and buzzwords. I listened, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The shock was gone. The hurt was still there, but it was being forged into something harder, sharper: resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about competence versus incompetence. It was about the slow, careful work of a lifetime being undone by arrogant fools who believed that a slick sales pitch could replace decades of experience. I told Sarah to be careful, to keep her head down, and to just keep me informed. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked at my hands. These hands had drafted the legal language that had generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. They had protected the jobs of hundreds of employees, and they had been dismissed as an unnecessary expense. Clara came into the study and put a hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" she asked. For 15 years, I had been the loyal company man. I had put the company's interests first, always. I had tolerated mediocre middle managers. I had cleaned up executive messes. I had worked through weekends and missed anniversaries. I did it all out of a sense of duty, of loyalty to the thing Arthur and I had built. That loyalty had been repaid with a box of my personal effects and an escort to the door. I turned and looked at my wife. "The loyalty is over," I said. "Now, it's just business, a new kind of business, my business." A flicker of something I hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time appeared. "Pride." She nodded. "Good," she said. "It's about time." The first step was to formalize my position. I spent the rest of the day not mourning, but building. I went online and registered a new LLC, Ironclad Strategic IP, LLC. It had a nice ring to it. Solid, dependable. Everything very cheap was not. I used my home address. I paid the fee. It was official. I was no longer an unemployed lawyer. I was a consultant, a founder, the master of my own fate. My anger was gone, replaced by an icy, methodical focus. This was no longer a personal slight. It was a strategic problem with a clear solution. Hunter had made a critical error, and I was simply going to let the consequences of that error play out. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it, and they had just lost it. The plan wasn't about revenge, not really. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was colder. It was about proving a point. It was about demonstrating in the most undeniable way possible the value of institutional knowledge. My knowledge. For years, my value had been an abstract concept, a number on a budget sheet that a guy like Hunter could look at and decide was too high. I was about to make my value very, very concrete. My first call wasn't to a competitor or a client. It was to an old friend, a man named David Chen. David and I had gone to law school together. While I had gone in-house, he had taken the big firm route and was now a partner at one of the most respected and feared intellectual property litigation firms in the country. He was the kind of lawyer you hire when you want to scorch the earth. I just wanted his advice. I laid out the situation for him, omitting my own role in creating the patent's flaw. I framed it as a hypothetical. A company, a foundational patent, a vulnerable claim, an upcoming renewal, and a new inexperienced legal team. David listened patiently, letting me talk. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant, calculating mind. Finally he spoke, his voice dry and precise. "Miles," he said, "what you're describing is a failure of counsel of catastrophic proportions. If this new firm misses the window to file a corrective continuation, the patent's core claim is effectively neutered. It wouldn't be invalidated, not right away, but it would be perpetually vulnerable. Any licensee, any competitor could challenge it, and they would likely win. The patent would become, for all practical purposes, a paper tiger." He paused. "The company's valuation would collapse. It would be a textbook case of professional malpractice." "Good," I said. "That's what I thought." Then I told him the whole story. The truth. That I was the architect of the vulnerability. I expected a lecture on ethics, on professional responsibility. Instead, he just chuckled. A low, appreciative laugh. "Miles, you magnificent bastard," he said. "You built a self-destruct sequence into the Death Star and gave the only disarm key to a janitor they just fired. It's beautiful. It's diabolical. Is it legal?" I asked. "My actions, I mean." He considered it. "You created the flaw while an employee, acting in what you could argue was the company's long-term security interest, a defense against a hostile takeover. You never disclosed it, true, but was there a duty to disclose a theoretical failsafe you never intended to use? Debatable. Now, you're a private citizen. You have no obligation to provide them with your specialized knowledge, especially after they terminated you. Your severance agreement probably has a non-disparagement clause, so you can't go around telling the world the patent is flawed. But you're not obligated to help them fix it. Your silence is perfectly legal, and very, very expensive for them." He then gave me the crucial piece of advice. "Don't do anything. Not yet. Let them fail on their own. The most powerful move you can make is to do nothing at all. Let the deadline pass. Let the ink dry on their incompetent filing. The damage will be done, irreversibly. After that, your knowledge becomes an asset of almost incalculable value." That was the core of the strategy. Patience. The same patience I used to build my model ships, plank by tiny plank. I had laid the trap years ago. Now, all I had to do was wait for the spring. Meanwhile, my inside source, Sarah, was providing a running commentary on the slow-motion car crash happening inside the company. Her texts were a mixture of panic and a kind of gallows humor. Todd from Vericheap just held a lunch and learn on the future of AI and legal. The sandwiches were stale, and the AI was basically a glorified search engine. Nobody from R&D showed up. A day later, he asked me to pull the file history for the 158 patent. I gave him the entire thing, all 20 boxes of it. He looked at it like he'd never seen paper before. He asked if I could just digitize it and email it over. It's thousands of pages, Miles. Physical documents, lab notebooks. He has no idea what he's looking at. This was better than I could have hoped. Hunter hadn't just hired a cheap firm. He'd hired a technologically arrogant one. They believed their proprietary algorithms could replace the painstaking work of actually reading and understanding the documents. They were looking for keywords, not context. They would never find the subtle ambiguity in Claim 1 because it wasn't a mistake or a typo. It was a carefully constructed piece of legal language designed to look perfectly normal to a superficial review. The flaw itself was elegant in its simplicity. It hinged on the definition of a single technical term, a substantially rigid substrate. In the context of our technology, this was the bedrock of the entire invention. The original patent application defined this term by referencing 3 existing technologies. What only I knew was that one of those references, a seemingly innocuous paper from the 1970s, contained a footnote that offered a much narrower, more restrictive definition of rigidity. The CIP I had prepared years ago added a clarifying paragraph that explicitly disavowed the narrow definition in that footnote and locked in the broader, more powerful interpretation. And without the CIP, any competent litigator could argue that the patent only covered a very specific, almost obsolete version of the technology, not the modern multi-million-dollar applications the company was licensing. It was a legal time bomb, and the new firm was walking right past it, admiring the decor on the walls. With David's legal reassurance and Sarah's insider reports, my confidence grew. The final piece of the puzzle was leverage. My knowledge was valuable, but only if I had a market for it. I couldn't approach our competitors directly. That would be a breach of my severance agreement and ethically dubious. But I could prepare the ground. I reached out to a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the general counsel at Omnicorp, our company's largest and most important licensee. Omnicorp paid us nearly $8 million a year for the rights to use our technology. I had negotiated that deal personally. Marcus and I had spent weeks hammering it out. We had developed a healthy professional respect for each other. He was sharp, pragmatic, and hated surprises. I sent him a simple, friendly email from my new ironclad strategic IP address. Subject: catching up, Marcus. Hope you're well. As you may or may not have heard, I've recently parted ways with my old company and have started my own IP strategy consultancy. Just wanted to reach out and reconnect. Let me know if you're ever in town. Best, Miles. It was a perfectly innocent email, but it did three things. First, it informed him that the man who had negotiated his license, the man he trusted, was no longer at the company. Second, it established my new independent identity. Third, it put me back on his radar. When the time came, he would remember this email. He would know who to call. The week crawled by. Each day the deadline for the CIP filing grew closer. Sarah's texts became more anxious. Miles, the deadline is Friday. They filed the standard renewal paperwork yesterday. I saw the confirmation. They think they're done. They're celebrating. Todd took his team out for drinks. I felt a grim satisfaction. They were celebrating their own funeral. They just didn't know it yet. I spent my days in my study, not pacing, but working. I was meticulously organizing my old files, building a new secure digital archive. I worked on my model ship, the quiet, focused task of rigging the tiny sails, calming my nerves. Each knot I tied was a reminder of the knots I had tied in that patent. The legal tangles that only I knew how to unravel. Clara would come in and watch me. She told me she hadn't seen me so calm and focused in years. The last few years at the company, I had been worn down by the creeping bureaucracy, the endless meetings, the feeling of being taken for granted. Now, I had a purpose again. It was a strange, dark purpose, but it was mine. On Friday, the day the deadline expired, I did nothing. I took Clara out for a nice lunch. I turned my phone off. I didn't want the satisfaction of seeing the clock tick over to 5 p.m. That would have felt too much like revenge. This was strategy. The event itself was a non-event, a quiet passing of a deadline that no one else in the world knew was significant. The trap had been sprung in complete silence. The patent was renewed, but it was a ghost, a hollow shell. The soul of the invention, its broad, commanding power, had vanished, and nobody at my old company had a clue. They had saved a few $100,000 on their legal budget, and in doing so, they had just torched hundreds of millions of dollars in enterprise value. It was, I thought with a cold sense of irony, a terrible return on investment. For 2 full days, I lived in a state of suspended animation. The deadline had passed at 5 p.m. on Friday. The world didn't end. The stock market didn't crash. Hunter didn't call. It was a strange, anticlimactic feeling. The bomb had gone off, but only I had heard it. Sarah texted me on Saturday morning. All quiet. They think everything is fine. Hunter sent a company-wide email congratulating the new legal team on a seamless transition. I read the text and almost laughed. A seamless transition into total disaster. My patience was the key. David's advice echoed in my head. Let them fail on their own. Your silence is your weapon.
Any overt move from me would look like sour grapes, like a disgruntled ex-employee trying to cause trouble. My play had to be subtle. It had to come from the outside. I needed a third party to discover the flaw, to raise the alarm. I had already laid the groundwork with my email to Marcus Thorne at Omnicorp. Now it was time to light the fuse. On Monday morning, exactly one business day after the deadline had passed, I made my move. It wasn't a dramatic confrontational act. It was a single, meticulously crafted email. I didn't send it to Marcus Thorne directly. That would be too obvious. I sent it from my external counsel, David Chen, from his prestigious law firm's address, to Omnicorp's deputy general counsel, a woman I knew to be exceptionally thorough and risk-averse. The email was a masterpiece of professional courtesy and veiled threat. Subject: routine inquiry regarding patent license 7,432,158. Dear Counsel, we are conducting a periodic IP portfolio review for a client in the sector and are undertaking due diligence on key patents in the field. In reviewing patent 7,432,158, licensed to your organization, a question of interpretation has arisen regarding the definition of substantially rigid substrate, as outlined in Claim 1, particularly in light of the patent's recent continuation filing history, or lack thereof. We would be grateful for your office's interpretation of the claim scope. We believe a clear shared understanding is beneficial to all parties. Sincerely, David Chen, Partner, Chen & Associates LLP.
The email was perfect. It didn't allege any wrongdoing. It didn't mention the flaw. It simply asked a polite technical question, but to a sharp patent lawyer which I knew Omnicorp employed, it was a giant, flashing red light. The phrase continuation filing history or lack thereof was the dagger. It pointed them directly to the scene of the crime. They would pull the public records from the Patent and Trademark Office. They would see the standard renewal, and they would see the conspicuous absence of the necessary CIP filing. Then they would look at Claim 1, and then the blood would drain from their faces. They would realize that the $8 million a year license they were paying for was built on a foundation of sand. I hit send on the draft David and I had prepared, and then I waited. It didn't take long. The blast wave hit my old company at precisely 2:15 p.m. that afternoon. I know the exact time because Sarah texted me in a state of pure panic. All hell is breaking loose. Hunter just got a call from the CEO of Omnicorp. He came out of his office looking like he'd seen a ghost. He's screaming at Todd from Vericheap on speakerphone. I can hear it from my desk. Todd keeps saying their algorithm cleared the filing. Hunter is losing his mind. I pictured the scene with grim satisfaction. Hunter, the master of synergy and streamlining, face to face with the real-world consequences of his brilliant cost-cutting. The abstract numbers on his spreadsheet had suddenly become very real. Very angry CEOs on the other end of the phone. The cheapness of his new law firm was no longer a virtue, it was an existential threat. My phone rang at 2:30 p.m. The caller ID said Hunter. I let it ring. I watched the screen, a small smile playing on my lips. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. Miles, call me. You are gent. I ignored it. I went back to my model ship, picking up a tiny pair of tweezers to affix a minuscule railing to the quarterdeck. My hands were perfectly steady. This was his panic, not mine. He had created this storm. He could ride it out himself. Another text. Miles, I know you're seeing this. This is your mess. You need to fix it. My mess. The audacity was breathtaking. He had fired the ship's captain and then, upon hitting an iceberg, was screaming from a lifeboat that it was the captain's fault for charting the course 15 years ago. The phone rang again. This time I answered. I put it on speakerphone, and Clara, who had come into the study, gave me a supportive nod. Miles, I said, my voice calm and professional. Miles, what the hell did you do? Hunter's voice was a ragged shout, laced with disbelief and fury. I'm not sure what you mean, Hunter. I'm a private citizen now, remember? Don't play dumb with me. Omnicorp is on the phone threatening to terminate their license. They're talking about suing us for misrepresentation. They say the 158 patent is worthless, that you built some kind of trap into it. I let the silence stretch. A trap? That's a very dramatic word, Hunter. I simply drafted the patents to be as robust as possible. All the company's IP requires careful, knowledgeable maintenance. It's complex work. That's why my department existed. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I assume your new legal team, very cheap, conducted their own due diligence before taking on the account. They are the counsel of record now. This is their responsibility. I could hear him sputtering. He was talking to Todd from Very Cheap, his voice muffled. He says it's our fault. What do you mean you don't know? Your algorithm. I don't pay you for algorithms. I pay you for results. He came back on the line to me, his voice dropping to a desperate growl. Look, Miles, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but the company needs you to fix this. Name your price. The offer. The desperate pivot from accusation to bribery. It was pathetic and deeply satisfying. Hunter, I said, my voice still perfectly level. I'm afraid you're not understanding the situation. I am no longer an employee of the company. I have no access to the files, no legal standing to act on the company's behalf. And my new consulting firm, Ironclad Strategic IP, has a very strict policy against taking on clients who are already represented by another firm. It would be unethical. I could hear him breathing, a harsh, ragged sound. He was cornered. He was realizing that the world didn't operate on buzzwords and bravado, it operated on details, and he had fired the one man who knew all the details. So that's it, you're just going to let the company burn, he asked, his voice now laced with a note of pleading. I didn't light the fire, Hunter, I said softly. I just stopped carrying the water for you. I hung up the phone. The silence in my study was absolute. Clara looked at me, her eyes wide. My God, Miles, she said, you really did it. I nodded, feeling a sense of grim finality. The first move had been made. The silent takeover was underway. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a threat. I had simply stepped aside and allowed gravity to do its work. They had mistaken my loyalty for weakness and my knowledge for a commodity. They were about to learn that some things don't have a price tag. Some things are simply priceless. The fallout from my phone call with Hunter was swift and spectacular. The panic that had been confined to the executive suite began to leak out, seeping into the foundations of the company like a toxic spill. According to Sarah, who was now my de facto intelligence agent, the office had devolved into a state of open warfare. The blame game was in full swing. Hunter was blaming Todd and his team at Very Cheap. Very Cheap, in a desperate attempt to cover themselves, was claiming that the company had failed to provide them with critical transition documents, a lie so blatant it was laughable. The R&D department, whose entire life's work was built upon that one patent, was in a state of near mutiny. The news, which had started as a whisper in the high-stakes world of corporate law, began to go public. A well-known industry blog that covered patent law published a short, cryptic post titled, "Is a major tech player's IP fortress actually a house of cards?" It didn't name my old company, but anyone in the know could read between the lines. It spoke of a foundational patent that had undergone a procedurally questionable renewal, leaving its broadest claims potentially unenforceable. The article was shared hundreds of times on professional networks within hours. The sharks had smelled blood in the water. This was the moment the power truly began to shift. It was no longer about a private dispute. It was about public confidence. My old company's stock, which had been stable for years, took a sickening 15% dip in a single afternoon. The market, like nature, abhors a vacuum, and the vacuum where our core IP used to be was now a gaping, terrifying hole. That evening, the first domino of the talent exodus fell. Sarah called me. Her voice wasn't hushed or panicked anymore. It was clear and resolute. "I quit, Miles," she said. "I walked into Hunter's office an hour ago and gave my notice. The place is a madhouse. It's toxic. Everyone is just trying to save their own skin. There's no integrity left. It's not the company you and Arthur Vance built." She paused. I was wondering, Does ironclad strategic IP have any openings for a highly experienced paralegal with intimate knowledge of a certain compromised patent portfolio? I smiled, a real, genuine smile. As a matter of fact, Sarah, I think we do. Welcome aboard. Send me your resume, just for the formalities. Her departure sent a ripple through the company. She was respected, seen as my protege. Her leaving was a vote of no confidence that everyone understood. The next day, two of the senior engineers from R&D, men I had worked with for over a decade, sent me private messages. They weren't just asking for jobs. They were asking for refuge. They saw the ship was sinking, and they wanted to be in a lifeboat with a captain who knew how to navigate. The true checkmate, however, came from a source I had anticipated but whose decisiveness still surprised me. Marcus Thorne from Omnicorp called me on my personal cell. "Miles," he said, his voice grave, "I think you and I need to have a conversation, off the record." We met for coffee the next morning at a small out-of-the-way cafe. Marcus got straight to the point. "My team has analyzed the 158 patent situation. Your friend David Chen's routine inquiries was anything but. We've concluded that our license agreement is predicated on a patent that is, for all intents and purposes, critically weakened. We are paying for a battleship and we have been given a canoe." I just nodded, sipping my coffee. "We have two options," he continued, steepling his fingers. "Option A. We sue your former company into oblivion for breach of contract and misrepresentation, and in the process the flaw in the patent becomes public knowledge in court documents, effectively destroying the IP for everyone. It's the nuclear option. Messy, expensive, unpredictable." He paused, looking at me intently. "Or there's option B. Omnicorp has been looking to expand its R&D capabilities. Your old company has a lot of talented people and a solid customer base, even if their core IP is currently compromised." I saw where this was going. "Our board is prepared to make an acquisition offer," Marcus said. "A lowball offer, frankly, given the circumstances. They'll buy the company for pennies on the dollar to acquire the talent and the assets. But the deal is contingent on one thing. The IP must be repaired. The 158 patent must be restored to its full strength. And as far as we can tell, there is only one person on the planet who knows how to do that." He leaned forward. "So Miles, the question isn't whether your old company survives. It's whether you're willing to work with the new owners. Omnicorp is prepared to offer your new firm ironclad strategic IP, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar retainer to not only fix the 158 patent but to audit and manage the entire portfolio moving forward. You would have full autonomy. You would have your team. You would answer only to me." There it was, not just vindication, a quiet coup. I would be put back in charge of the very fortress I had built, but this time, as its undisputed master, not a loyal servant. I would have a bigger budget, more authority, and a boss who actually understood and respected my value. While this was happening, Hunter was making his last desperate stand. He tried to counter-manipulate. He sent me a formal offer via email, a new title, Senior Vice President and Chief Intellectual Property Counsel, a salary that was double what I had been making, a signing bonus, an apology, written in the sort of stilted corporate language that made it clear a lawyer had drafted it for him. He was trying to buy me back, to plug the hole in his sinking ship with money. I replied with a single sentence, "Thank you for the offer, Hunter, but my consulting firm's policy is to avoid conflicts of interest." His response was a desperate, rambling phone call. He pleaded, he threatened, he told me I was violating my severance agreement, that I was tortiously interfering with their business. I just listened calmly. "Hunter," I said when he finally ran out of steam, "I suggest you have your lawyers, the ones from Very Cheap, carefully read my severance agreement. They'll find it's a standard template, with more holes in it than a block of Swiss cheese. I haven't disparaged the company. I haven't shared proprietary information. I have simply retired. And then I started a new business. It's the American way." I paused. "As for interfering with your business, I haven't spoken to a single one of your clients or employees who didn't contact me first. They're not fleeing a sinking ship because I told them to. They're fleeing because they can see the water rising around their ankles." I let that sink in.
You had a choice, Hunter. You chose cheaper. You got what you paid for. I hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. The power had shifted completely. He was irrelevant, a ghost in a machine that had already moved on. The talent was leaving. The biggest client was orchestrating a takeover, and the man he had fired held all the cards. He had tried to save a little money and had lost everything. It was a classic case of a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. The final act didn't play out in a boardroom or a courtroom. It played out on my front porch, a week after my meeting with Marcus Thorne. On a crisp Saturday morning, a sleek black car pulled up to my curb. Hunter got out. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale, and the predatory confidence he had exuded in that conference room was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate exhaustion. He walked up my driveway and stood on the welcome mat looking like a man about to be sentenced. I had seen him coming from my study window. I met him at the door, opening it just enough to talk, leaving the screen door between us as a symbolic barrier. "Miles," he said, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk." "I don't think we have anything left to talk about, Hunter." "Please," he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth. "The board is meeting on Monday. They're going to vote on the Omnicorp offer. It's a fire sale. They're going to wipe out the shareholders. They're going to fire me. My career is over." I just looked at him. I felt nothing. No pity, no schadenfreude, just a kind of weary detachment. This was the inevitable outcome of his own actions, the logical conclusion of his philosophy. "You did this to me," he said, his voice rising with a note of bitter accusation. "You deliberately sabotaged the company. All these years you sat on this landmine, just waiting." "That's where you're wrong," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I wasn't waiting. I was hoping I would never have to see this day. That landmine, as you call it, was a defense mechanism. It was designed to protect the company's soul from someone exactly like you, someone who would see a legacy and only think of how to strip it for parts. I didn't sabotage the company, Hunter. I just built it with an immune system. You were the virus. The system just did its job and expelled you." He stared at me, speechless. The analogy, the cold clinical truth of it, seemed to finally break through his wall of self-pity and rage. He saw, in that moment, that he wasn't a victim. He was a consequence. "You know," I continued, "the day you fired me, you talked about synergy and streamlining. You said you wanted to outsource to someone cheaper. You got it. But you forgot the most important rule of any business, of any system." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locking on his. "Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. Then it becomes the most expensive thing in the world." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. I saw the last bit of fight go out of his eyes. He just stood there, a hollowed-out man on my doorstep. "Goodbye, Hunter," I said, and I gently closed the main door, leaving him standing on the other side of the screen. I walked back to my study, and I didn't look back. 2 days later, the news became official. A press release announced that Omnicorp had acquired my old company for a fraction of its value from a year prior. Hunter was terminated, effective immediately. The board of directors was dissolved. The very cheap law firm was facing a multi-million-dollar malpractice lawsuit. My new reality began the following Monday. My first official act as a consultant for Omnicorp was to file the continuation in part for patent 7,432,158. It was a simple electronic submission, the same one I had prepared 7 years ago. With a few clicks of a mouse, I restored the heart of the company's IP. I healed the wound I had created, but on my own terms for a new appreciative owner. My new office was a beautiful, light-filled space in a new building, but I found I did my best work from my study at home. I hired Sarah as my chief of staff. I brought on the 2 senior engineers from R&D to lead a new innovation division under the ironclad banner, funded by Omnicorp. We weren't just fixing the old portfolio, we were building a new one. We were creating, not just guarding. I sat at my desk, looking at the finished model of the USS Constitution. It was perfect. Every rope, every sail, every plank was exactly where it should be. It was a monument to patience, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. I had weathered the storm. I had faced the betrayal and the uncertainty, and I had come out the other side, not just intact, but stronger. I was no longer the indispensable man, a title that implies servitude. I was the essential man, and I was free. The new workplace reality wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. The respect I had failed to demand for myself for 15 years, and which I would now never work without again. So what's the moral of the story? It's something I think about a lot, sitting here in my study, a place that's no longer a satellite office of someone else's empire, but the headquarters of my own. For 15 years, I confused loyalty with value. I thought that by giving my unwavering loyalty to a company, my value would be recognized, respected, and rewarded. But I learned the hard way that a corporation is not a family. It's a system, and in a system, loyalty is only valuable as long as it's convenient for those in power. Your true value isn't in your loyalty. It's in your competence. It's in the unique, irreplaceable knowledge you possess. It's the skill you've honed over years of dedication. The problems only you know how to solve. The metaphorical ships only you know how to build. That knowledge is your fortress, but a fortress is useless if you give the keys to someone who doesn't respect what it protects. I made a mistake for years. I let my identity get completely wrapped up in my job title. I was Miles, the in-house counsel. When they took that title away, for a day, I felt like I was nothing. But then I realized they didn't take my knowledge. They didn't take my experience. They didn't take my integrity. They just took a label. And in doing so they set me free. They forced me to build my own label, my own company, on my own terms. The ultimate vindication wasn't watching Hunter fail. It was watching my own team succeed. It was seeing Sarah take charge, seeing the engineers light up with new ideas, free from the bureaucracy that had stifled them. It was the quiet satisfaction of creating something new and better out of the ashes of something that had been carelessly broken. My story is about a very specific kind of revenge, a corporate chess match, but the lesson is universal. Never let anyone else define your worth. Understand your value, cultivate it, and if you have to, build your own fortress where that value is the law of the land. They might think you're just a line item on a spreadsheet, an expense to be cut, but you have to remember that you are the asset. They just work there. This was my story. I bet some of you out there have your own. Maybe it wasn't a patent, but a client list you built, a software system you coded, or a team you mentored. We've all felt undervalued at some point. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did I do the right thing? Was it justice, or was it just cold revenge?
I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of professional vindication, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and of course hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for listening.